Hi, I'm Scott Graham from Barker College, and I'm here to talk to you about some HSC tips and tricks for doing well in agriculture in the HSC. A little bit about me first. So I did agriculture in year 7 and 8 because it was compulsory, and growing up in Sydney hadn't done any before or had anything to do with agriculture, but kept doing it, really enjoyed it, did it till year 12 for the HSC, went and did ag science at Sydney Uni, which I loved, and got into teaching, have been teaching ag since 2010 and have done HSC marking since 2016. I did HSC judging for agriculture in 2018-19, which I'll talk about shortly. And I was also a HSC senior marker in 2020, 2021, and last year as well. So today we're going to go through three things. First one is how to revise. Second one is how to do exams. And the third one is student tips. And I'm going to introduce Mrs. Lucy Pitkin to do the first section.
Hi, I'm Mrs. Pitkin. I'm an agriculture teacher at Barker, and this is a short video to help you with some tips and tricks for preparing for the agriculture HSC. A little bit about me first. I grew up in Cootamundra in southwestern New South Wales on a mixed farming property. I was sent to school in Sydney though, and unfortunately the school that I went to didn't offer agriculture, so unlike you lucky people, I didn't get to do agriculture for the HSC. It didn't stop me though. I was very interested in ag, and I went on to do a Bachelor of Science in Agriculture at the University of Sydney. Then worked in the wool industry and helped to run our family farm for a number of years before I started my education degree, which then kicked off my career in teaching. I've been teaching now for over 8 years, and I've been an HSC marker for the last 3 years. So this little video is going to run quickly through how to prepare summary notes, understanding the syllabus, the use of examples, and how to get the most out of your past paper questions. So firstly, summary notes come really naturally to some students, and that's great. You're a very lucky person if that's you, but other students find it really tricky to understand or to work out how much detail to include, how to structure your notes, and what parts of the syllabus require a bit more information than others. Generally, the advice is really to be quite concise, but making sure that you include your specific examples, any statistics that you might need to use in your responses, and to use diagrams. They are very helpful. They're really good for reinforcing that understanding and committing the information to memory. So there are two examples on the screen here, two different students, slightly different approach to summary notes. So the first one on the left shows a student that has used handwritten notes, but you can see they're very organised, they're very structured, lots of uses of tables, particularly this is animal hormones in the animal production section of the syllabus, and so there's lots of use of tables and some colour coding. We've got some use of highlighting there, which is very good. And then the same on the other side, different approach, but also really organised, brief summaries of the information, and there's also the use of a diagram there. And this is the same two students, slightly different part of the syllabus. You can see again using diagrams where appropriate, taking a really structured approach and linking to the syllabus. So both students have the dot point from the syllabus at the top of the page there. So there's one over here. And it's really clear to these students then where this information sits in the syllabus. So you've got your summary notes, and the next point is then to summarise again in some other form. So this is not a summary of the information, or, it's not all the information that you'll need by any means. These are meant to be memory joggers. So this next summary should be using, maybe flashcards or a diagram or doing a mind map, some kind of graphic organizer to help you with that visual prompts and to keep it really simple and concise. Then you can use it in a variety of ways. So you could use it to test yourself. One really good way is to deconstruct and reconstruct diagrams. There are some key diagrams in our syllabus, like the energy diagram, that are quite easy to print out, cut up, and then you can jumble it all up and practice reconstructing it. It's a really good way to test yourself and to understand where things belong in that diagram. There's a few other examples that you can use throughout the syllabus as well. The next thing that you can do, especially if you've got some flashcards or some kind of mind map, is to link key dot points in the syllabus together. There's lots of parts of our syllabus that are related or that follow on from each other, and there are more and more questions in our exams that link multiple dot points and go across different dot points, and a really good strategy to help you with that is to, perhaps if you've got flashcards with different information on them, you could spread them out all out on a table and organize them to see what relates and how they relate to each other. The next important part is to know the syllabus, and so there's some key things about our syllabus dot points that give you guidance as to what you need to be able to do and how you should be approaching questions in particular. So if we look at the two diagrams on the screen, we can see that they're two different parts, completely different parts of the syllabus, but the top one has including in red and the second one has such as. And including dot points mean that everything after that word, the list of hormones there, can be tested and they can be named in questions. So students have to learn every single one of those hormones, because we could be asked specifically in the HSC about follicle stimulating hormone or about progesterone or testosterone, okay? All of them. Whereas the second dot point has such as listed and then a few examples after that. So because it says such as, the questions can't ask you specifically about legislation or specifically about tax incentives, but they're great examples, and they're examples that you should learn, some of them, so that you can draw on them to answer questions. So questions on that dot point might be along the line of outline the influence that governments can have on the production of the product that you've studied. That's a product study dot point. The next part is to understand the verbs in each dot point, and also then in your questions when you're approaching exam questions. So these NESA keywords are the same. They're all available on the NESA website. If you Google NESA keywords, the list comes up with a definition for each one. And it's important to understand the range of complexities. So identify is a really simple one. You literally could just write the name of something, whereas it gets then progressively more difficult through outline, describe, explain, discuss, and the most complex one generally is evaluate. And it's really important to know for those, particularly for those more complex ones, exactly what you need to do for each of the dot point of the keywords. So for evaluate, for example, the definition on the NESA website is make a judgment based on criteria. And so if you could do a lot of writing, you could write a lot of correct information, but if you don't have a judgment with some key criteria, so saying whether or not something's effective and why, then you will lose significant marks in a question that has asked you to evaluate. So understanding your keywords in the dot points and in the questions that you're responding to is really, really important. We've already talked about finding links between dot points and thinking of the overarching picture. Really try to avoid kind of siloing the content and separating it out from each other. Understand that it's something that the content is all related, and it's important to be able to link those things. And also, we've all been there. We all have walked into an exam thinking, oh my goodness, I really hope that a question on insert hard topic or hard section of the syllabus here is not in the exam. But top students who do exceptionally well, they know those weak points early on. We all do. We probably can think right now, we've got months before the HSC exam, and right now we can probably think of 3 or 4 things that we hope maybe aren't in there. But the key then is to know that and to work on those areas until you're not weak on that area anymore. In agriculture, it's really important to demonstrate just how much you know. So many of you know really amazing things, But it's really important to include those in all your responses and be really specific. So instead of just talking about a genetically modified crop, talk about a specific example, for example, BT cotton. Instead of talking about in general about IPM programs, talk about a specific IPM program that you've learnt about in class, and where possible, use scientific names. So for example, if you're talking about BT cotton and the IPM program for the control of Heliothis in cotton, then terms, scientific names such as Bacillus thuringiensis, which is the bacterium from which the gene for BT cotton was extracted, and Heliocoverpa armigera, which is one of the bollworm species. Using those scientific names is really important, and it's what shows the markers that you have a comprehensive understanding of that particular part of the syllabus. And so I said comprehensive deliberately because understanding the marking criteria, that's a common, it's a common word in a lot of our marking criteria, and we're going to talk about, in a couple of slides down, we're going to talk about understanding the marking criteria and why that's so important. So past paper questions, the thing that everybody loves to do, are really important, and they're a really great way to take a lot of the fear out of exams and a lot of the stress, because if you do lots and lots of practice, then nothing's going to surprise you when you get to the HSC exam. You'll find that the questions, while different, are very familiar, and you will know how to approach each one because you're really familiar with the verbs and you've had lots of practice at doing that. So once you've done your past paper questions, you really need to get them marked for feedback. And every single person, even the best student in the state, makes mistakes along the way. But the difference is, if you do lots of practice, is that you get to make those mistakes in your practice questions, and it's just between you and your teacher, and not in the exam when it counts and you're being assessed. The next step then is to have a look at some questions and try to create your own marking criteria. So being really familiar with marking criteria is an amazing strategy that you can use to improve your responses. So we've got an example question on the screen here, and it shows you a graph, then it's yield per hectare versus planting density, and you can see a curve there on the graph. And it asks you to explain the reasons for the increase and decrease in yield per hectare shown in the graph. So explain is, we need to relate cause and effect. We need to say why there's an increase in the graph, as increase in yield as planting density increases, and then why there's a decrease in yield past a certain point as the planting density continues to increase. So if you look at the marking criteria, we can see that to get 4 marks, you need to clearly link reasons. So if you miss this little tiny S in the question and you only talk about one reason, then you're going to be down here at 2. So automatically, just reading the question and annotating your questions is a really good idea, so that you don't miss those plurals or not address the verb. And we can see that we've got reasons and looking at the increase and decrease because it says and in the question. And so basically there's a question of 2 halves there, 2 marks for an explanation of the increase in yield per hectare and 2 marks for an explanation of the decrease in yield per hectare. It's a good idea to have a go at marking your own past paper questions. So after learning to create marking schemes, have some practice marking your own questions, or you could team up with a friend, a classmate, to mark theirs, and they can mark yours. Self-reflection is a really important thing, and sometimes it's something that is tricky but is really important. It can help you make really great progress. And then get it checked by the teacher. Make sure that what you're marking, the way that you're marking yourself or the way that your friend is marking you, is accurate and correct. That's it from me. I hope that this has been very helpful for you. And I wish you all the best in the HSC. I think Mr. Graham is going to continue to help you now.
All right, so I'm going to take you through the second section on how to do exams and how exams are set, what markers are looking for, those kind of things. So in terms of how HSC exams are set, they're written a long time in advance. So for your paper this year, it would have been written last year by a committee, a number of teachers who are experienced in agriculture. And it's written and would have been signed off already earlier this year as finalised. And it's also checked by experienced agriculture teachers who aren't teaching Year 12 this year. And they check that it fits the syllabus, that it can be done in the time allocated, that there's a good range of questions, those kind of things. And so the format really is going to be the same as it has always been. So you can know what to expect. It's going to be 100 marks. You're going to have 20 multi-choice questions, and you're going to have 80 marks of short answer questions. It's also important to know that it's evenly weighted across the syllabus. So you shouldn't be just focusing on animal or just focusing on plant or product study, but you should focus on all things because there's going to be an even amount in the exam, and that's what NESA expects. So that will happen. And so there's also, of course, the 20-mark option topic section, which, each school, there's 3 different option topics, but different schools choose different option topics. But there's always a 12-mark question in there. And so it's really important that you do well at that. It's the largest part of the paper. And being 12%, it's 12 marks, it's 12% of your HSC exam. And therefore it's 6% of your entire HSC agriculture course mark. So it is really important that you know what those questions are going to be about, and you have a good knowledge of the content that's going to need to go into those responses, because they do need to be a longer response. So it's really important to focus on that. In terms of how marking works, a group of experienced markers are chosen by NESA. They're put into different groups, and each group has a senior marker who runs the marking group, and that marking group of 6-7 people, they mark, in the case of agriculture, all of a couple of questions. So they'll mark a couple of questions, and they'll mark all of the students in the state for that question. In the case of agriculture, and so that means that it's a very consistent process, that it's very fair, because the same group of people with the same experience are going to be marking your whatever question is that they're marking for everyone else in the state. And so when we're marking, before we get started, we practice on hundreds and hundreds of papers in a group to make sure that we're all getting the same marks for getting consistency there of marks for the same, responses, so that we know that we're all seeing the same things and looking for the same things and giving the same marks. And so that's really important. The process is super fair and super consistent. Some things also get double marked. So for example, the 12-mark question, gets marked by, gets given 2 marks by 2 markers, and you get the average. And so it's really important, to know that it is done very thoroughly, and things are checked as well by the senior marker. So it is a very good process. So in terms of what markers are actually looking for, now we're looking for what you do know. We're not trying to penalise your takeaway marks or look at where your inadequacies are, but we're looking for what you do know. And so we're looking both for the content that you have put in there, but also your engagement with the verb, which we're about to talk about in a minute. So, if it's an explain, have you shown cause and effect? If it's an evaluate, have you shown a judgment with criteria, that kind of thing. We'll talk about that more in a second. Of course, higher order responses, or, harder questions with needing higher knowledge level and higher ability level, you really need to include specific examples. So you might say BT cotton for an example of a biotechnology or something like that. Like you're giving a bit of detail about it, and obviously using accurate terminology as well really helps that, to show that you know what you're talking about and you're not just making it up and kind of throwing things in there, but you actually know what you're talking about. It's important to know as well that we can't mark things that are crossed out, even if they're correct. So NESA tells us that we need to honour the wishes of the student, and if you've drawn a line through it, even if we can read it and it's correct, we have to give it 0, because you've indicated that you don't want it read by putting a line through it. So just be careful about what you do put a line through. Maybe not do it at all if you can help it. The other thing is, don't leave blank responses, because it's sad to see in at school when people sometimes maybe don't answer a question at all. It's one word can be a mark potentially if it's related to the question and it's not in the question. So just always, if you're really struggling and you can't remember much on a certain question, just put anything you can and that you can get some marks there. The last point here is we're not looking for questions to be rewritten, just answer it, because we've read that question probably 200-300 times that day, and we know exactly what the question is, exactly. And so it's a waste of time, it's a waste of your space, probably when people spend the first 1 or 2 lines rewriting out what's in the question or just in a slightly different way. It's worth nothing because it hasn't shown anything. Anyone can rewrite the question, but it's not knowledge and it's not understanding, so it's not worth anything. So don't rewrite it. Just get into the answer. The next thing is looking at verbs, and so it's important that you understand all the verbs. They go from easy to hard, and so the less complex ones here aren't worth as much in marks and don't need to do as much for, and the ones down here you need to do a lot more for, and obviously they're worth a lot more, and you need to be then showing a higher level of knowledge and understanding and some examples and linking things together for these harder ones down here. And so these are in order of complexity from identify, outline, describe, explain, discuss, evaluate. And so we're going to look through each of those now. So what I want to talk about is, this is identify, the first one, and it's really easy. It's the easiest one. All you need to do here, for example, when it says identify 2 factors that can affect fertility of animals, is you just need to recognize a name. So you could just put nutrition and genetics, as it says here, and that is 2 marks just for those 2 words, and that's it. As long as they're correct and they're answering the question, then you get the marks. The next one is describe, which is getting a little bit harder. So you have to provide the characteristics and features. And so this says describe the essential components of an IPM program for a pest disease, and I've given biological, chemical, and physical, and then I've given a little bit of detail, a few characteristics and features here to get full marks there for a describe. Then we move to explain, and we're starting to get a bit harder here, and we have to relate cause and effect and make relationship between things evident. So for example, it says explain the purpose of 2 name marker specifications, and this first one I've done here is pH of meat, and I talk about pH of 5.8 or higher leads to dark cutting meat, tough meat. The purpose of the spec is to ensure pH upon slaughter is 5.3 to 5.7, giving optimum tenderness. This occurs through minimizing stress and adequate feed prior to the slaughter. So I've given the cause and the effect here. I've linked those 2 things together, and I've done it again for the second specification. The second last one, or the second hardest one, I guess, is discuss. So you need to be giving, identifying issues and providing points for and or against. And so it asks you to discuss strategies available to market farm products here. The first one I've listed is vertical integration. And so you can see it does say and or against. I like to see students doing both for and against, but you don't have to do both. But I always get people to do that anyway. So for vertical integration, I've given a bit of overview about what vertical integration is. I said Craig Cook's prime quality meats is an example, which is really important to put in higher order responses. And then I've really clearly labeled here my positive and negative. So my positive is allowing more control, I'm giving a bit more detail about that, and then discussed it a bit here. And then the negative, it costs more money and more capital is required to purchase multiple steps. So I've actually discussed it there. I've given detail and I've given advantages and disadvantages. And for a discuss, you don't have to give your opinion. It's okay for you to sit on the fence. In fact, they want you to, give both sides potentially advantages and disadvantages. The last one here is evaluate, and this is the hardest one, and it requires you to make a judgment based on criteria. And so this is actually evaluating an IPM program, which is a very common question in the HSC and other exams. And so I've talked all about my IPM program here. I've given chemical example, biological, physical, even genetic, and then I've given it my evaluation here at the end of the whole program. So I've said it's highly effective. So that's my judgment term there, highly effective. I could also say it's very poor. Maybe I could say it's unsustainable. They're all good judgment terms where I'm giving my clear opinion. And I said at controlling resistance above, both reduce pathogen numbers, but non-chemical methods will kill many of the resistant pathogens, reducing resistance buildup. So that's really my criteria here for my judgment. So I've said it helps reduce chemical resistance buildup. Now, as I kind of said earlier, for an evaluate, if I don't know what your opinion is when I've read your evaluate and you've just done advantages and disadvantages and I don't know your opinion, you're definitely losing marks on an evaluate if I don't know your opinion. So you need to be very clear on what your opinion is and why in an evaluate. The next thing is to do a marking scheme during the exam. So hopefully when you're doing past paper questions at school for practice, you're initially looking at the past HSC marking scheme so that that, this outline question, the marking scheme is this discussed question, the marking scheme is this, and they're pretty common, and it's not hard for you to work out what the marking schemes might be. So when you're in an exam, you can then think about what might the marking scheme be, and you might write little notes around the question before you actually answer it to help you, know what to write about. You might come back later and actually answer the question, but you've written something there about marking scheme, and also writing a little plan on how you're going to answer it. So I always advise people to go through each question and write little comments on what they're going to write in the margins, and then come back later. Once you've done that to all the questions, come back later and actually answer it. And what you've done there is you've given your brain 2 shots at answering it, because the first time you think about it, it may be the wrong thing, and by coming back to it, you're giving your brain a second go at thinking, hang on, that thing I first thought was wrong, before you've actually written the answer. So write a little plan, go away, do other questions, same thing, and then come back and answer it later. Give your brain a second shot at it. What I also advise students to do is to do subheadings and like numbering. So for example, here it says evaluate 2 different strategies to market the product. So what I've done here, what this student's done is first one's forward contracting, the second one's direct marketing. They've underlined it and said, here is my 2 things, and also gone 1 and 2. And so, yeah, it makes it easier for the marker to find. I mean, they're going to find it anyway because it's not going to affect your marks really, but it is making it clear. And I think it helps you as a student because it makes it clear in your mind that you have actually done it, and that you have actually done a good job of both, and not just done, 3/4 of the answer on one and a little bit on the other. So I think it's really helpful to do that and structure it like that in your mind and then on paper. And so here's another example of that with describing ways. It's important when it says ways with an S, it obviously has to be more than one. So we've got sausages and we've got kebabs. Another one here, again, underlining the different methods. So components of IPM, we've got biological, chemical, and physical, and I've underlined each of those to say to the marker, like, here they are, here are the 3 that I want to talk about. One part I want to talk about is HSC judging. So when marking's finished, a group of about 6 or so experienced markers get together and they do a process of what's called judging. And so you will know that you have a school assessment mark based on all your assessments at school, and then a raw exam mark. And the school assessment mark, of course, is moderated based on the HSC, so that the mark that you get from your school assessments is fairly compared with another school, because obviously some schools might mark easier and set easier assessment tasks, and some might do harder ones. And so it's not fair to get raw assessment marks counting towards your HSC. So they moderate them against the HSC. And so that's a really fair process. But what I wanted to talk about here is this, where we get what's called judging, which we fit the bands. And no doubt you know about band 6, band 5, band 4. And they're all standards that NESA has set. And they say that a band 6 student can do this, this, this. A band 5 student can do this, this, this. And so a band 6 student should look similar across all the different years. So if you look, 2022, 2021, 2020, 2019, a band 6 student that's getting, say, a 90 in the HSC should always look the same because it's standard based. Now, you probably know that, some exams are harder and some exams are easier. And that's the case with HSC exams too. And so the raw exam mark that you get in the HSC is not the mark that NESA ends up telling you because it is actually judged. and it is actually fit to band. So for example, if an exam is really hard one year in the HSC, you might get a mark of 85, 82, and if let's just say it was 82 and it was a really hard exam, maybe those students that are getting 82 in the HSC are actually showing band 6 characteristics, according to what NESA thinks they are. So when that gets judged by the judges, they go, hey, these people who, they go through all the questions in the paper, they say what students should be getting roughly if they're a band 6 student, in each question, because it's not always full marks. It might be 4 out of 6 for this question because it's a really hard one for the lowest band 6 students. And so once that process happens, they then determine a mark. And so that 82 may end up becoming a 90, which is what you actually get reported potentially if it's a really hard exam. Now, it could be the opposite. It could be, wow, this was a super easy exam, and only people that get a 92 raw mark in the HSC are showing band 6 characteristics. So a 92 might become a 90. So it's important to know that it's flexible. Like, it depends on, the exam that's set. And so it's matched to the standards. It's aligned to the standards. And so you'll see on the NESA website that there are band 6 descriptions about what band 6 students can do. And there's a band 5 description about what band 5 students can do in agriculture. And so I would advise you going on the NESA website for agriculture and other subjects and having a look at those and thinking, what is it that a band 6 student can do that a band 5 student can't do? So for example, a band 6 student can demonstrate extensive understanding of the role of ag sector in Australia, whereas a band 5 student only demonstrates a sound understanding. Or a band 6 student displays an extensive knowledge and understanding of interactions in Australia in agriculture, whereas a band 5 student only displays an understanding and knowledge, not an extensive knowledge and understanding. So it's worth you having a look at these and comparing them and thinking, what is the difference between them, and how do I kind of try and be this one and not this one? It's definitely worth doing that, because what you end up getting on your HSC, exam mark is not the raw mark you get in the exam is kind of not that important. What's more important is what you can actually do and show. And so you want to be able to be doing these things, band 6 qualities in the exam. So this last section is looking at student tips for doing well in the exam. And these are things that I've seen students use, and also students have told me that they find helpful. So obviously keeping up to date with things throughout the term. Summary notes you've already heard about, but keeping up to date with them either at the end of lessons if you've got time to spare, or on the weekend, because if you leave it more than, say, a week from when you've done that topic in class, you're probably not going to do it. Don't leave it until before exams. It's important that you try and complete all past paper questions that you can, and also get them marked by your teacher, and because you can't improve without feedback. And we've already talked about that earlier. And of course, ask questions if you don't understand. Remember, these are points from students that students have told me, and I've noticed has worked well. So again, when you're getting close to an exam, approaching an exam, doing lots of past papers, top students also know the syllabus dot points really, really well, and they don't have any areas they're weak at. So you need to understand what questions are asking. So for example, marketing strategies and advertising strategies in the HSC are two different things. And so you need to understand when a question says marketing or advertising strategies, which one you need to talk about. Because if you talk about the other one, you're going to lose marks, quite a few marks. So you really need to understand that, okay? And same thing with, say, improving quality versus assessing quality. They're two different things. This next thing is target weak topics you don't understand and don't like, and improve on them. So even top students that I've had in the past all have weak areas at some point at the start, but they don't let them remain weak areas, because they don't avoid them. They work out, okay, I'm not good at this, and they keep working on it until they're good at it. And so everyone has weak areas. It's just the top students don't let them stay weak areas. And if there's no past paper questions for any dot point, then the best way to practice is just to rewrite your notes on them. In the hours before exam, don't stress out, don't overstudy, have a quick read over your notes. This is advice from students, of course. Don't overdo it, otherwise you'll stress more. And then don't hang around other people who are stressful people, because that will freak you out as well. So those are the tips from students, and that's how to do well in the HSC in agriculture. Thanks.